You know, when it comes to science, I'm one of those jack off all traders, masturbators of none. But in this episode, oh, that's jack of all trades, master of none. Sorry about that. But in this episode, I want to discuss with you the history of the Zodiac. And I'm going to support my position very well, I believe. And I'm going to be able to show you why I believe that it's actually possibly older than any of the constellations that make it up. Now, that's a crazy idea right there, huh? Man, Uranus or something. I don't even know. You finish that joke off yourself. Well, hello and welcome back to DeDunking. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the history of the Zodiac. And there's three things in particular that I think historians either miss or heavily underestimate when they look at the history of the Zodiac. And the first thing would be something called sympathetic magic, which I've touched on a little bit before. Basically, sympathetic magic is this old school idea that, like, you eat the heart of a lion or wear the skin of a bear and you gain the properties of that animal. Or basically the idea is that things are magically imbued with whatever power you would just think they had by looking at the damn thing, right? So an egg is a fertility symbol, duh. A rabbit is also a fertility symbol, duh. So that's sympathetic magic, right? And I think that plays heavily into the astrology side of what the Zodiac is, because as we'll discuss, the Zodiac is, in and of itself, the use of the Zodiac isn't really woo, it's a way to tell time. But if you are a guy who knows how to tell time using the Zodiac in a time when nobody else knows how to use the Zodiac to tell time, your ability to predict the future could very easily be conflated via sympathetic magic type of thinking for woo. Because I mean, you got to think. I would assume to these people that they wouldn't have called it sympathetic magic or even called it magic at all. You eat the heart of a lion, you gain the strength of a lion. Duh, that's just the way the world is. And so I think that astrology was viewed that way as well. The next thing that I think gets overlooked is archetypes. I think that's a really important way to view the symbols that make up the Zodiac, as opposed to looking at them as this is a lion and this is a set of scales. As we'll see later on, the Scorpio's claws used to be the scales, okay? So what this is equal but opposite parts making up the whole. It's the same archetype. So by looking at it through the lens of the archetype as to what something represents as opposed to what it is, I think that sometimes historians might actually have better luck finding things that are constellations that are staring them right in the face. Now, the third thing that I feel like they overlook or heavily underestimate is that the use of the Zodiac as a whole is a means of telling time. It's not just some way to do like woo stuff with the stars. It's like most constellations are ways of grouping stars together, frequently used for navigation and the like, but the Zodiac is laid out across the ecliptic, and it's in 12 basically equal parts. And that's why the constellations just look fuck all like what they're supposed to, because that doesn't really matter. It could be an empty chunk of sky. That doesn't matter. What it matters is it's this 12th of the sky. That's where the sun is this time of year. So if you look due east on the vernal equinox, you will see the constellation of whatever age we are in, and the sun rise into it. And that's like right now it's Aquarius, and we're in the age of Aquarius. And every 2,160 years, those signs change. And so when the sign at the vernal equinox changes, obviously all the signs change. That precession of the equinoxes has the Earth slightly shifting through that. And it's a little complicated, but not that big of a deal for what we're talking about. What matters is every couple thousand years, like clockwork, the entire mechanism shifts by one constellation. So when these constellations are measured, they look at the vernal equinox. This is an old standard, and no historian will really argue with that. But I'm going to put out there that any culture that could measure the equinoxes could also measure the solstices. It could measure all four. So it wouldn't just name one constellation. It would almost certainly name all four and have your cardinal points. So in my opinion, when these constellations were named, they didn't just name one. They would name them in groups of four, probably very early on. Again, this is the kind of observation, if they're able to observe an equinox, they're able to observe both equinoxes. And they're able to observe the solstices. These aren't complicated things if you watch the sun. That a clock has 12 points, just like the zodiac. It has 4 cardinal points marked heavily to the point where you don't even need the other ones. When you look up there, you got a memory stick duo, for fuck's sake, to tell you what the next number is. You don't need it because you have the cardinal points. It's the same, I believe, as the zodiac has been used that way for a very, very, very long time. And the 3 cultures that we got our zodiac from, as most of you will already be aware, would be Egypt, Greece, and Rome. And the earliest that we can find of like a zodiac laid out would be the Dendera calendar, and it shows a lot of the symbols that we have in our traditional Western zodiac nowadays. But it also shows a lot of the traditional Egyptian stuff, like their system of decans, which was like 10 groups of 36 degrees or some shit like that. I don't remember how exactly it all goes. It's not really important. What is important is that it divides the year up into 360 days. They just skip those other 5 because they like to keep that number divisible by 12. And when we go to Babylon, we see 10 of the 12 signs of the zodiac in their records, but we're missing Libra and we're missing Cancer. Now, Libra is usually represented as the claws of the scorpion at this point, and so that's probably what we're looking at here. And Cancer, we're not 100% sure about. And so the historians' mainstream take is that they're, just, oops, I guess they hadn't invented all of the zodiac yet. Maybe they just had 10 symbols back in those days, maybe 11, I don't know. To me, I'm seeing a yardstick that's missing an inch. The Cancer's got to be there somewhere, man. They were measuring the sky with this shit. It wasn't just like, again, these constellations are used as a tool. It's not just some random constellations they picked out of the sky and was like, yeah, I think that looks like a lion, call that a lion. I think that looks like a crab, call that a crab. It's like, no, this quadrant of the sky. So maybe they just had an empty chunk of the sky back then and had some word for 0 for it. I don't know. But what I do know is, I can't know for certain, but what I'm pretty certain of is they had the sky measured with this. It's not just constellations that they were using for just some fun thing. So missing one of them is kind of like a glaring issue right there. It just tells me that we haven't seen something that's probably right under our damn nose. And if we go to Sumeria, we see Aquarius, Leo, Taurus, and Scorpio, and these were their 4 cardinal constellations at the time. And these show up on a lot of like their seals and stuff. But you don't just like see them thrown everywhere, you see them fancy stuff. Now, I would argue, and this is getting out there a little bit as far as the speculation goes, that this is mild evidence for us seeing, like I was saying about the astronomers and astrologers and it being a blurred lines, them being esoteric knowledge. You didn't tell everybody that the scorpion and the bull, all this meant something, but you let other rich, smart people know that you knew what that shit meant. Now, I could be wrong about that. It could turn out they were all running around with that stuff on every single person everywhere, all over the area. I don't know. But it seems to me that the way that it's kind of used, it's not used as constellations in these older cultures. You don't see them like crammed in with a bunch of stars and shit like you do by the time we get to Egypt. So it makes you wonder if maybe it wasn't, makes me wonder anyway, if maybe it wasn't a little bit more of a hidden knowledge at that point, that it's like, this scorpion's there, but you don't know what it means. But seeing all 4 cardinal points on their seals and whatnot does tell us that the Sumerians were measuring the sky like that long ago. And now let's talk about China. And those of you who are aware of the Chinese zodiac, you probably know it's way different than the Western one. Barely superficially similar at all, right? Well, I would posit to you that there is a shared history there, a really, really, really ancient shared history. Notice that both of them have 12 points, but the Chinese zodiac, like I've been pointing out, is about the Western zodiac. It's just a way of chopping the sky into 12 spots. There's no constellations there. They don't have anything to do with constellations. It's about where Jupiter is over the course of 12 years, right? But it's about 12 points in the sky. Now, in China, they have a lot of woo built into a lot of different beliefs. I mean, I don't even know how else to describe it. It's like 12 earthly branches and 10 heavenly stems is like how they count time and how they build their language and how they... It's like... I don't even know how else to put it except for it's like some weird sort of metric system for woo, where it just ties all of it together and just makes like this little woo ball of all the shit in their culture. Like there's symbols that go with each one of these astrological symbols, and those symbols also correspond to hours of the day and just all kinds of goofy shit. It's just all weirdly intertwined, but what matters here is it goes way back. Some scholars say all the way back to the beginning of Chinese written language, like old. And so it's possible that China is actually where this convention of chopping the sky into 12 pieces to measure the path of the sun came from. Now, again, I know that here it's Jupiter, but I've got a little bit more to talk about here. Now, when you look at a sundial from, say, ancient Greece or ancient Egypt or Babylon or Sumeria or any of those guys that made sundials, they tended to have 12 points on them because the convention was to measure time in groups of 12. This wasn't up for debate, and as I've already said, I believe that convention came about because of the zodiac. So when you look at an ancient Chinese sundial and you see them also using 12 and 24 to count the number of hours in a day, that seems to be influenced from the same source to me. But I got even more to talk about there. Now again, the zodiac is designed based on the parent path of the sun over the course of a year, right? So the Chinese still have constellations that do this too, but it's not called the zodiac in their case. As a matter of fact, it's not even really constellations. It's called the 28 mansions, and it's just a way for them to chop the sky up into 28 pieces and do the exact same damn thing. Sky in 28 different pieces, and then they've got their same kind of metric system of woo. All this shit's still tied into it and weirdly attached. After they incorporated the 28 mansion system, you start to see that same system showing up on their sundials. It was like they recognized that this was the way that you told time. Like they recognized that this was an emulation of marking the ecliptic. They had adopted this new system from Vedic India, it looks like, according to the scholars, and with the adoption of that new system, now were measuring time differently on their hours, on their timepieces. They had adopted that as their hours. Now, I posit that shows that they realized that they had using 12 there because they were using this old system of chopping the sky into 12 pieces, and that it was based on the Chinese zodiac, and that's where we got ours from. That's why the Chinese zodiac's got archetypes. I think the animals there are archetypes, and you can go through and compare them to the archetypes in the Western zodiac and make whatever arguments or lack thereof that you would like to. Lots of other people have done this kind of thing in the past there. But I do think that again, it's all about the chopping of the sky into 12 equal pieces. And I do believe that China shows a strong contender for being the first place that this showed up, or at least the inheritor of the first place it showed up, because it must have come from Atlantis, right? Totally came from Atlantis. So in summary, I think that our clocks are copies of the zodiac, and I think that our zodiac was quite possibly descended from the Chinese convention of chopping the sky into 12 pieces. And that convention doesn't exactly rely on constellations the same way as the zodiac does. So I do believe that this is a very, very, very old idea, and there's a very good possibility that the constellations attached to it are exceptionally old. I think when it comes to esoteric knowledge, this may be some of the oldest esoteric knowledge that humanity has. Probably is the oldest esoteric knowledge that humanity has. And I also think that because this knowledge is shown to be powerful, it does demonstrably predict the future. I think that the core principles of it would be kept and maintained when it was passed through different cultures and whatnot. It would be incorporated to different ideas and different religious beliefs, but the core principles that made it function were almost certainly going to be clung to hard. And I think that convention of measuring hours, measuring time in groups of 12, I do believe that is a little remnant of the original system there. Anyway, let me know what you think about that down in the comments below. And thank you very much for watching this far. I will have a regular old DeDunking coming for you soon. Try to kind of intersperse them with some informative stuff like this, and so it's diversify and whatnot. I got a portfolio. Anyway, have a good evening.